Asterisk, one gunshot, one boy, and a nation that would never be the same again. In front of millions watching live, a child's life was stolen and his mother's cry shook the world. Months later, the courtroom fell silent as the verdict rang out. Guilty. How did a single night at a gas station ignite a movement and bring an officer to justice? This is the story of Elias Carter. And if you believe these stories should never be forgotten, subscribe now and walk with us through every chapter of truth. Asterisk, the last stretch of sunlight bled across the southern highway, painting the old utility poles in a fading, rusty glow. A silver SUV rattled along the cracked asphalt, its worn engine humming like a tired old Dodge inside. Soft jazz whispered from the radio until the driver reached over and turned it down. Her eyes stayed on the road, brows slightly furrowed as though she carried the weight of two worlds at once. Maya Carter was 42, tall and lean, with a sharp-boned face that carried the marks of battles fought in courtrooms and on the streets. Once a federal attorney, she had built her career defending those crushed by systemic prejudice. These days she lectured on human rights at a small university, but the faint lines at the corners of her eyes and the way her hands curled on the wheel betrayed the truth. Justice had never left her life. It only lived quieter, hidden beneath the role of a mother. In the back seat, 13-year-old Elias wrestled with a tangle of headphone wires. His light brown skin glowed faintly in the waning light. The boy had his mother's sharp eyes and his father's restless energy. A comic book lay open on his lap, though his lips were moving in time with a rap track leaking from his old music player. "What's so funny?" Maya asked, still watching the road. "Nothing," Elias grinned. "It's just this rapper. He makes protesting sound like a punchline, but it's still real. Makes me laugh, but it's sad too." Maya glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Her face softened. "You'll find a lot of things in this country are funny and sad at the same time, son. That's America. At least I have you to tell me the truth," Elias said, his smile a mix of innocence and defiance. Not the sugar-coated version they shove in textbooks. That made her laugh, though it carried more pride than joy. She pulled into a lonely gas station, its flickering neon sign buzzing overhead. Two pumps stood like weary sentries under a humming fluorescent light. Beyond the cracked pavement stretched nothing but fields of cane and the endless gray road. "Want a drink? Orange juice?" she asked, pulling her wallet from the console. Elias shook his head. "I just need to stretch my legs. That's all." "Fine, but stay close to the car. Don't wander." She closed the door and headed toward the store. That's when two officers emerged from the cruiser already parked out front. One was tall and gaunt, eyes sharp and cold, Officer Simmons. The other, stockier, face ruddy and damp with sweat, wore a lazy grin that reeked of familiarity with Power Officer Harlan. Harlan's eyes landed on Elias first, stretching in the evening air by the SUV. His smile twisted. "Doesn't look much like her, does he?" he muttered. Simmons narrowed his eyes. "Skin tone doesn't match." Maya hadn't even reached the store door before Harlan called out, loud enough for Elias to hear. "That kid back there, he isn't yours, right? Looks like he belongs to somebody else. Maybe picked him up out of some project?" The words hit like a backhand across the chest. Elias froze, comic book trembling in his hands. Maya spun, stepping quickly between the officers and her son. "What did you just say?" Her voice was calm but iron-edged. "Just asking questions," Harlan said with a shrug. "People deserve to know who belongs where." Elias's face had gone pale, his knuckles white around the book. Maya's gaze flicked to him, absorbing the silent hurt in his eyes, then snapped back to the men. "You don't get to question my son's place in this world just because of his skin," she said, voice steady. Simmons pulled a small notepad, pretending to jot something down. "Suspicious behavior. We have the right to investigate. The only suspicious behavior here," Maya shot back, "is the way you're profiling a child." The station clerk, A nervous white man behind the counter peeked out and froze as the officers turned toward him. "Hey," Harlan barked. "You see this kid hanging around inside your store?" The clerk stammered. I don't think so. I mean, maybe. I was busy with the register." "But he looked suspicious, right?" Simmons pressed, each word heavy with pressure. The clerk's eyes darted. After a beat, he nodded faintly, just enough to protect himself. "Mama, I never went inside," Elias cried, panic cracking his young voice. "I was in the car the whole time." Maya wrapped an arm protectively around his shoulders, glaring at the officers. "You're framing a child. That's what this is." Phones came up. Screens glowed in the dusk. People muttered to one another. "Not again. The boy didn't do anything. They're setting him up." The crowd was small, but the first live streams were already running. Simmons snapped open his handcuffs. The metal glinted under the flickering light. "The boy needs to come with us." Back to the station. Maya stepped forward, planting herself between her son and the steel. "If you want to arrest someone, take me. But you're not laying a finger on him." Harlan leaned closer, breath hot with tobacco. "Listen carefully, lady. Around here, we define justice. Not you." A chill swept through the humid air. The cane fields whispered with the evening wind, and the fluorescent lights buzzed louder, as if straining to bear witness. Elias's hand clutched his mother's, trembling. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Maya's chest rose and fell with a slow breath. She had spent a lifetime watching moments like this tear other families apart. She never thought it would be her turn. "You want me?" she said, her voice low and unyielding. "Then take me. But you will not touch my son." Simmons's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that. If he resists." Harlan's grin spread wider, almost hungry. He looked like he was waiting for exactly that moment. Out on the highway, a pair of headlights approached, stretching long shadows across the cracked pavement. 3 adult silhouettes loomed, swallowing the fragile figure of a boy. The night hadn't fully fallen yet, but the darkness wasn't waiting. It was already here. The air around the gas station thickened, as if the humid southern night had drawn in its breath and refused to exhale. The buzzing fluorescent light above the pumps flickered, casting sharp shadows across the cracked pavement. Maya Carter held her ground, her arm protectively locked around her son's shoulders. Elias clung to her side, wide eyes darting between the officers, the crowd that had begun to gather, and the blinking red light of a phone pointed directly at them. "Back away from the boy," Simmons ordered, voice flat and metallic, like the click of his cuff snapping open. "He's coming with us." "No, he isn't," Maya shot back. Her voice carried the steady authority of a woman who had once dismantled prosecutors in court, but it trembled under the surface with something raw fear, not for herself, but for the boy pressed against her hip. Harlan's laugh came low, mocking, and ugly. He gestured to the clerk inside the store, who was now peeking nervously from behind a display of potato chips. "You said you saw him, didn't you? Wandering around in here? Acting suspicious?" The clerk's eyes flicked between the officers and Maya. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. I wasn't sure. Maybe I saw him." Elias's voice cracked with desperation. "That's not true. I never left the car. Mom, tell them." Maya spun on the officers, rage boiling into her words. "You just coerced him into lying. That's not testimony, that's intimidation." But Simmons was already jotting in his pad, the tip of his pen scratching like nails on a coffin lid. Suspect identified by witness. Possible petty theft. Phones lifted higher. The live stream counter ticked upward 70, then 100, then 200 viewers. Comments poured in. "He didn't do anything." Classic profiling. "Stay strong, Mama." Harlan stepped closer, hand resting conspicuously on the butt of his holstered weapon. He leaned down so his broad frame towered over Elias. "You hear that, kid? Someone saw you. Better to admit it now before things get worse. Elias flinched, his breath hitching. Maya angled herself between them, planting her palm firmly against Harlan's chest. "Don't you dare lean into my son like that." Gasps rose from the small crowd. Someone whispered, "She touched him." Another muttered, "They'll use that." Simmons's eyes narrowed into slits. "That's obstruction. You just put your hands on an officer." "No," Maya snapped. "I stopped you from harassing a child." The tension was a live wire, crackling in the humid night. Every move seemed to sharpen the edges of what could come next. A young man in a red hoodie at the back of the crowd raised his phone higher, streaming on Instagram. His voice carried, clear and defiant. "They're framing that kid. We all saw it. He never even walked into the store. Put that phone down." Simmons barked. "Not a chance," the young man called back. "The world's watching now," and indeed it was. The live stream ticked past 500, then 7. A torrent of angry comments flashed across the screen. Maya felt Elias trembling against her. She bent her head, whispering fast, urgent words. "Stay with me. Don't move unless I move. Eyes on me, baby." "I'm scared," Elias whispered. "I know. But fear doesn't own you. Hold steady." Harlan's grin widened, his teeth catching the fluorescent light. He spoke loud enough for the whole crowd to hear. "You think these people care? They'll put their phones down and walk away. But me, I'm the law here. And your boy," he jabbed a finger toward Elias, "looks guilty as hell." The words landed like a slap across the pavement. The clerk inside shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the crowd shouted back, "He's a child, you bastard." "Step aside, ma'am," Simmons ordered. "Or we'll treat this as resisting arrest." Maya's voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the force of holding herself together. "You want to arrest me, fine. Do it. But you are not taking my son." A hush fell, broken only by the static buzz of the neon sign. Even the insects seemed to pause, as though the night itself recognized the precipice they now balanced on. Simmons raised the cuffs higher. Harlan's thumb brushed the strap of his holster. And Elias, clutching his comic book like a shield, whispered the words that cut through the night. "Mom, are they going to kill me?" The question silenced everything. Even Harlan's grin faltered for a heartbeat. Maya closed her eyes, swallowed the ache clawing her throat, and answered with steel in her voice. "No, I won't let them." But the lie echoed inside her. Because she had seen this ending before. The night pressed closer, thick as wet wool. Somewhere out on the highway, a semi blew its horn, the low note rolling through the cane fields like a warning nobody could quite interpret. Inside the gas station, the clerk fumbled with a stack of scratch-off tickets, pretending to read the rules while his eyes kept cutting to the door. He was waiting for the scene to end on its own, for somebody else to absorb the blow. It didn't. A woman in blue scrubs stepped out of a compact car, a hospital ID swinging from a lanyard. She took in the tableau, the boy clutching a comic, the mother braced like a seawall, the officers triangulating. Her mouth tightened. She moved to the edge of the crowd and lifted her phone like the others. "Ma'am," Simmons called, never looking away from Maya. "Step back. This is a police matter." "I am stepped back," she said. "And it's still a human matter." A teenage girl near the pumps, hair tucked under a satin bonnet, whispered to her screen. "We live at the Sinclair off 17. They're trying to take a kid. Share this right now." Her comments spooled in a frantic ribbon. "Where is this? Get their badge numbers. Don't let them cut the feed." Harlan's hand slid casually from his holster to his belt, but the implication stayed. "Last time, move," he told Maya. She didn't. "My name is Dr. Maya Carter. I'm a licensed attorney and a professor of human rights. You are conducting an unlawful stop based on race. If you intend to detain my son, you'll articulate reasonable suspicion." "On record." "You're not in a classroom," Harlan said. "Then pretend this is a test." she said. And the line rippled through the onlookers. A nervous half-laugh that wasn't laughter at all. Simmons angled his body, the way cops do when they want to corral. He looked past her to Elias. "You, empty your pockets." Elias swallowed. I don't have anything." "That's not an answer," Simmons said. Stepping in, Maya shifted, blocking his path with a single precise step that placed her between the law and her son. "You will not search a minor without cause and without a guardian's consent, which I do not give. Consent isn't necessary when we've got probable." "You don't," she cut in, voice clean as glass. "You've got a hunch and a bias. That's not the law. That's a habit." For 1 second, the two men simply watched her, something like irritation curdling into calculation. Then Simmons motioned with the cuffs again, a small clink that seemed to vibrate against the humming light. "Turn around, ma'am." Hands behind her back, Elias's fingers dug into her coat sleeve. "Mom, it's okay," she said to him, never taking her eyes off the officers. "Breathe. In and out. Watch me." A trucker with sunburned forearms shuffled forward until he stood level with the nurse. "Hey," he called, loud but steady. "I been here 10 minutes and that boy ain't gone nowhere near that door. Y'all can roll back the cameras." He jerked his chin at the security dome mounted under the eave. All heads ticked upward. Inside the store, the clerk froze, then reached for something under the counter. A second later, the little red LED under the camera lens blinked off. The crowd inhaled in unison. "Nope," said the teenage girl into her stream. We saw that. Maintenance issue," the clerk blurted. "Too late." "Of course it is," Maya said softly, and for the first time her voice carried a shard of bitterness. She lifted her own phone one-handed and spoke not to the officers, not even to the crowd, but to the lens. "My son has not entered the store. The camera above pump 2 has just been turned off. Officers Simmons and Harlan are attempting to detain us without cause." The names hit the air like tacks. Simmons's jaw flexed. "Put the phone down." "Not a chance," said the nurse. "HIPAA doesn't apply." "Sweetheart." The comment thread on the red hoodie kid's stream exploded. 1.3K watching. Record badge numbers. "Call a supervisor." He shouted the last part aloud. "We're requesting a supervisor on scene." "Dispatch already knows," Simmons said, though no one believed him. The radio on his shoulder crackled to life and died again. As if embarrassed, Harlan edged left, eyes on Elias. "What's your name, son?" Elias squeezed the comic tighter. "Elias. That your mama's last name? You got ID?" "He's 13, Maya said. He's got a library card and a report card. That's all the ID a child needs to be a child." "Cute," Harlan said, and his smile emptied of anything human. He took a step closer, then another. Maya mirrored each one. The space between them compressed to a thin seam of shared air that smelled like gasoline and the metallic tang of rain about to break. Somewhere behind them, a child started crying. A mother shushed him with a rhythm that only made the sound more mournful. Simmons pivoted suddenly, going not for Maya but for the boy. He reached past her forearm, quick and practiced. She moved faster. Years of courthouse corridors and a lifetime of being underestimated coalesced into a single, simple motion. She caught his wrist mid-grab and pushed it gently, but firmly down and away. Not aggressive, not even forceful, just an elegant refusal of the premise. Gasps. Someone said, "She assaulted him," but most people said nothing at all, because the truth was so plain it didn't need a committee. Simmons jerked back, a bright flush riding his cheekbones. "That's it," he said. "You're under arrest." "For what?" Maya said, not a question, a demand. "Obstruction. Interfering with an officer." "I interfered with a stranger trying to lay hands on my child," she said. "And I will again, carefully, calmly, in front of all these witnesses." "Lady," Harlan said, "witnesses don't mean what you think they mean. "They do now," said the girl with the bonnet. "We are the record." "Say your badge numbers again." The trucker cupped his hands around his mouth. "Badge numbers." Harlan's grin faltered. "I said step back." The crowd didn't. They didn't surge, didn't push, but they didn't recede either. A new phone blinked on, then another. The nurse said into hers, "If you're a lawyer watching this, drop your number in the chat." Elias's breath was too fast. Maya could feel it against her ribs. She lowered her head until her forehead almost touched his. "We're here." "We're here," she whispered, the words like a metronome. "Count with me." "1," he managed. "2," she said. "3." His voice steadied against the counting. Like a boat finding the rhythm of waves. Simmons consulted the air, as if someone could hand him a better script. None arrived. He lifted the cuffs again. Final warning. Maya slid her phone into her pocket, freeing both hands. She placed her palms open in front of her, fingers spread, showing emptiness to the camera, to the guns, to the sky. "Here are my hands," she said, voice pitched to Carrie. "I am not resisting. I am protecting my child." Harlan's radio crackled with a burst of static and a clipped voice. "Unit 7 status?" "Under control," he lied, thumb pressing the transmit. Then he moved his hand back to the holster, not resting now, but measuring the angle. The way men measure things they've already decided to use. The trucker saw it. The nurse saw it. The girl in the bonnet said to her audience very quietly, "If he draws, don't look away." A pickup pulled in too fast and braked hard, scattering gravel. A man in a Saints cap jumped out and hustled to the edge of the crowd. "What did I miss?" he asked, then immediately stopped asking and started watching instead, which was the correct order of operations. The clerk inside mashed a button under the counter. The door locks thunked. He turned the sign to closed and then, shamefaced, turned it back to open, because he remembered there were still 3 customers in the aisles pretending to compare jerky brands while they filmed. "Get your supervisor," Maya said again, lower this time. "And keep your hands where they are. Don't tell me what to do," Harlan said. But he didn't draw. Not yet. Simmons eased to the side, choosing a new vector, trying to be clever. He looked at Elias as if the child were a door he could simply open with enough jiggling. "Kid," he said, overly bright. "I bet you're good. I bet you're a good kid. You tell me what you took and I promise this gets easier." "I didn't take anything," Elias said, and the smallness of his voice was the loudest sound in the lot. "See?" Maya said, "You hear that? That's the truth. It has a particular timbre. Learn it." "Ma'am," Simmons said, making her title an insult, "truth has paperwork. And right now, the paper says, the paper will say whatever you write on it," she said, and something inside her finally harpooned the pretense. "Which is why we won't leave with you. That did it." The mask slipped. Harlan's stare sharpened into something meaner, something eager. "Won't?" he said softly. "Lady, you're in Louisiana. You don't get to won't." He stepped in. Maya didn't retreat. Neither did the crowd, and that, maybe, more than anything, is what changed the physics. The air moved. The night leaned. Even the neon sign seemed to decide which way it was going to flicker. A siren wailed somewhere distant, then cut. Not closer, not farther. Just there, waiting. A woman near the pumps, hair in rollers, lifted her chin and spoke not to the officers, but to everyone else. "Don't let them split us," she said. "Stay where you are. Film each other too." Phones pivoted, catching not only the center but the perimeter, the faces in the second and third rows. Accountability braided itself like rope. "Last time," Simmons said, and his voice had lost the metal. It was just tired now. "Turn around." Maya didn't. Instead she said, "Elias, tell me your favorite chapter." He blinked. "What? In your book?" "The one you're holding." "Your favorite chapter?" He swallowed. The one where the hero figures out his power isn't punching. It's seeing. He can see what's about to happen, and he saves people by warning them. Good, she said. That's a good one. She lifted her face to the camera again. We see you, she said, not to the officers alone, but to the system that huddled behind them, to the clerk who'd killed the camera, to the algorithm carrying this night to rooms that would pretend not to notice. We see you. For a heartbeat, oddly, no one moved. In that pause, the scene tightened into clarity. A boy barely into his teens. A mother with empty hands held open. Two men with weapons they hadn't earned the right to use. A crowd of strangers refusing to scatter. Then the clerk's landline rang, shrill and insistent. He snatched it up, listened, nodded, and stared through the glass. His lips formed two words everyone could read, even if they couldn't hear them. Shut it. Harlan's smile returned, thinner now. Supervisor's not coming, he said. Then we wait, Maya said. We wait together. You don't call the shots. I'm not calling anything, she said. I'm naming what is. She looked at the boy. What is right now is you breathing. Keep doing that. 1, he whispered. 2, she said. 3. The red hoodie kid lifted his phone higher, stepping onto the low curb of the pump island to get a clean frame. There are 200,000 people watching, he said, voice shaking with the magnitude of it. 200 holy 250. Don't stop filming. Harlan heard the number. Something in his eyes flickered, a small animal instinct, desire warring with caution. He looked at Simmons. Simmons looked at the cuffs. The cuffs gleamed. The night held. Fine, Harlan said, and his hand made the decision his mouth hadn't. His thumb popped the strap on the holster with a sound that pierced the humid dark, like the click of a door you can't reopen. The crowd sucked in air. The nurse's phone shook. The girl in the bonnet whispered into her mic. Don't look away. Maya didn't. She tilted her body, a shield the shape of love, and placed herself between the gun that wasn't yet visible and the boy she'd brought into the world. Elias, she said, voiced the steady cadence of a lighthouse. Eyes on me. His eyes found hers, and in them she put everything. The mornings with cereal and sunlight, the lecture halls and lullabies, the cases she won and the nights she lost. All of it braided into 1,000 silent promises that had no right to be tested this way. Across the lot, Harlan drew a breath that widened his chest. His palms settled. The strap fell, and the world, 200,000 screens and one small gas station waited for the next frame to decide what kind of country it was. The strap snapped back with a little flick, and the crowd's silence grew so taut it could have cut glass. Harlan's hand lingered on the grip of his pistol, but he didn't draw, not yet. Maybe it was the weight of the phones, maybe the quiver in the air, maybe the stubborn eyes of the mother and child before him. Don't, Maya said, low but unshaking. One word, spoken like it had teeth. Elias's small fingers squeezed her sleeve. Mom? She lowered her head just enough for him to hear the softness in her voice. Keep counting, baby. 4, 5, he whispered, lips trembling. The trucker with the sunburn raised his voice. Officer, you pull that gun on a kid, the whole damn world's gonna see it. You hear me? You won't get to write this one away. The crowd murmured their agreement, mothers clutching toddlers, young men gripping their phones like torches, elders with faces set like stone. They weren't just witnesses anymore. They were a jury forming in real time. Simmons's face flushed a dangerous red. He jabbed a finger toward the boy. That kid's suspicious. Look at him, clutching something in his hands, could be anything. It's a comic book, Maya shot back, her voice sharp as a whip. She turned to the crowd. Show them. Elias lifted the comic, his hands shaking but defiant. The cover gleamed under the fluorescent light, a hero in bright colors, mid-leap, saving strangers. For a moment, the absurd innocence of it cracked the tension. You see? Maya pressed on, seizing that sliver of air. That's the weapon they're ready to kill a child over. Phones zoomed in, screens flashing as the image was shared. Hashtags began sprouting in comment threads. Hashtag comic not crime. Hashtag hands off our kids. Harlan's jaw worked, chewing his frustration like gristle. Lady, you're making this worse. No, Maya said, lifting her chin. I'm making it visible. Then a siren whooped again, closer now, growing louder until the glare of another cruiser's headlights splashed across the pumps. The supervisor had arrived. The crowd shifted, hope and dread colliding in equal measure. A heavy-set lieutenant stepped out, his cap tilted low, eyes sweeping the scene. He paused when he saw the line of phones, the live streams aimed at him like rifle barrels. His hand hovered near his belt, then dropped. What's going on here? He demanded, voice booming across the lot. Simmons jumped to speak. Suspect child caught stealing, mother obstructed officers. Liar! The nurse yelled, stepping forward. That boy never left the car. We've been standing right here. Everything's on video, the teenager in the bonnet added, lifting her phone higher. 500,000 people are watching live right now. The lieutenant froze, the words sinking in. His gaze flicked to Maya, to Elias, to the officers with their weapons too close to ready. Then, deliberately, he barked, "Holster your damn guns." For a second, Simmons hesitated. Then, under the weight of eyes digital and human alike, he shoved his weapon back into place. Harlan's lips curled, but he followed suit. The tension broke, not with relief but with ragged breaths and the sound of Elias exhaling for the first time in minutes. He sagged against his mother's side, comic still pressed to his chest. Maya stroked his hair, her own chest heaving, then looked squarely at the lieutenant. You almost let your men execute a child because of the color of his skin. The world has seen enough. We're not going anywhere quietly. The crowd erupted, chanting now low at first, then swelling. Justice for Elias. Justice for Elias. Phones caught every angle. Hashtags ignited like wildfire. And the gas station became more than asphalt and pumps. It became a fault line cracking wide open. The lieutenant's radio crackled again, urgent and sharp. Be advised. Media en route. Hold your positions. But positions had already shifted. The people weren't just holding, they were rising. The chanting swelled, justice for Elias, like the steady roll of thunder before a storm. Phones rose higher, their lenses multiplying until every breath, every twitch of muscle was broadcast to a faceless, furious world. The lieutenant barked at the crowd to disperse, but his voice was drowned by the rhythm of voices refusing to bend. He glanced at Simmons and Harlan, then back at the hundreds of eyes fixed on him. And for the first time that night, his authority looked fragile. Maya felt Elias trembling against her hip. She bent low, whispering, "Stay with me, baby. Whatever happens, don't let go." "I'm scared," Elias breathed. "I know," she whispered. "But fear isn't stronger than us." The lieutenant made a choice. "Cuff them both," he snapped. "We'll sort it downtown." The words were gasoline. The crowd roared in protest. "No!" Maya shouted. "You have no probable cause, and the world knows it." She turned, speaking straight into the cameras. "Everyone watching, remember this moment. A child is about to be taken for the crime of existing." Simmons lunged forward, cuffs outstretched. Maya pivoted, shielding Elias with her body. The boy yelped, clutching his comic as though it might turn into armor. "Stand down!" Someone from the crowd screamed. "We're filming everything." The lieutenant barked again. "Do it." And then chaos. Simmons grabbed at Maya's arm. She twisted, pulling Elias back. Harlan shoved through, hand already yanking his weapon free. The crowd gasped in unison. The nurse cried out, "Gun! He's pulling a gun on the kid." Maya spun, locking eyes with Harlan, her hands raised, palms out. "Don't!" she screamed. He's a child. But Harlan's grin widened, feral, as though the cameras only stoked the fire. One less little thug in the world, he sneered. Elias's scream tore through the humid air. Mom! The gun roared. The blast ripped across the parking lot, echoing off concrete and steel. Elias jerked, the comic book tumbling from his hands as his knees buckled. Maya caught him before he hit the ground, her own scream ragged and raw, echoing like an animal wounded beyond healing. Blood seeped warm against her palms, staining her blouse. Soaking into her skin. The crowd erupted shouts, sobs, curses. Phones trembled in hands suddenly slick with sweat, but none lowered their cameras. On every screen across the nation, the image froze for a split second. A boy's body in his mother's arms, a gun still smoking in the hand of the man who had sworn an oath to protect. And then the flood came. Comments. Hashtags, fury uncontainable. Hashtag justice for Elias. Hashtag murder in uniform. Hashtag never again. Maya pressed her cheek to her son's cooling forehead, whispering through her tears. Stay with me. Please, baby, stay. But Elias's eyes, wide and terrified, were already dimming. The nurse dropped to her knees beside them, fumbling for a pulse she already knew was gone. Her voice cracked as she shouted to the crowd, "Keep filming! Don't you dare stop filming!" Harlan lowered his gun slowly, lips curling into that same cruel smile. Worlds cleaner with one less problem. The words, captured on a dozen live streams, burned themselves into history. The chanting was gone now, replaced by a tidal wave of rage. Strangers surged forward, not to attack, but to bear witness more closely, their voices a chorus of disbelief and grief. Maya rocked her son's body in her arms, her tears mixing with his blood, her scream shredding the night until it wasn't one mother's cry anymore. It was a nation's, and the cameras never looked away. The gunshot still rang in the air, echoing off metal and glass long after the sound had died. For a moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. The buzzing fluorescent light, the flickering neon sign, even the chirp of night insects, all of it held still, as though the world refused to move forward without acknowledging what had just been done. Maya cradled Elias in her arms. His comic book lay sprawled on the concrete, a crimson bloom spreading across the bright costume of the hero on its cover. His chest heaved once, twice, then faltered. She pressed her palms against the wound, whispering broken words that felt like prayers though she hadn't prayed in years. Stay with me. Please stay. You're okay, baby, you're okay. But the warmth beneath her hands told the truth. Blood. Too much, soaking through her blouse, her skin, her very soul. The nurse beside her pressed trembling fingers to the boy's neck, searching for a pulse. Her voice cracked as she whispered, I can't, she broke off, shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Maya's scream ripped from her throat, raw and unearthly, the kind of sound that carved itself into memory. The crowd staggered back under the weight of it. Some wept openly. Others shouted curses at the officers, phones never lowered. Screens across the country know, the world lit up with the image of a mother soaked in her child's blood. The live stream numbers surged into the millions, comment threads exploding faster than they could be read. Oh my God, he was a child. This is murder, murder. Say his name, Elias Carter. Through it all, Harlan stood with his pistol still raised, smoke curling faintly from the barrel. His face twisted into a smirk that curdled the air. One less thug on the streets, he muttered. Every phone caught it. The words were immortal now, etched into digital stone. The crowd erupted. Murderer! They screamed. Murderer! Simmons, pale and wide-eyed, tried to grab Harlan's arm, hissing, Jesus, what have you done? But Harlan shook him off, eyes gleaming with a defiance that looked more like madness. Maya rocked Elias's body in her arms, her cheek pressed to his cooling forehead. Tears streaked her face, but beneath them something harder began to rise. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied into iron. "You killed him," she said, lifting her head to face Harlan. "You killed my son for nothing. And the world will not forget." The red hoodie teenager holding his phone shouted, voice cracking with fury. "They shot him. They shot the kid." The whole world just saw it. The chant swelled again, louder this time, unified and furious. "Justice for Elias! Justice for Elias!" The lieutenant tried to bark orders, "Everyone back! Disperse immediately!" But the words dissolved under the roar of grief and rage. Cars slowed on the highway, drivers climbing out to sea. More phones rose. More streams lit up. And through it all, Maya refused to move. Her knees pressed into the concrete, her son in her lap, her gaze locked on the man who had ended his life. She looked like a mother, yes, but also like something else, an indictment made flesh. "You can write whatever report you want," she said, voice carrying over the chaos. "But the truth is already written in every camera, every witness, every drop of his blood. You will not bury this." Harlan's smirk faltered. The crowd pressed closer, their voices a storm. "Murderer, killer, justice for Elias." And somewhere, in 1,000 homes across the country, people who had never heard the boy's name felt the earth shift beneath them. The gas station was no longer a roadside stop. It was a crucible. The thin veil of ordinary life-buying snacks, filling tanks had been ripped away, leaving only blood, rage, and history repeating itself in real time. Maya sat in the center of it all, knees pressed against rough concrete, holding her son's body like an anchor to a world she no longer recognized. Her blouse clung wet and heavy, crimson soaking the pale cotton. Her lips moved in whispers, fragments of lullabies once sung at bedtime. The same songs Elias had fallen asleep to, now spilling into the open night as a dirge. Around her, the crowd's grief was turning. Sorrow hardened into fury. The chant returned, guttural and booming, a wave that rolled over flashing cameras and trembling voices. "Justice for Elias! Justice for Elias!" Harlan shifted uneasily now, his smirk cracking under the weight of thousands of invisible eyes. "Back off!" he barked, waving his pistol, though the barrel shook ever so slightly. "You already killed him." A woman screamed. "What else you gonna do? Shoot us too?" Phone zoomed closer, the crowd emboldened. Simmons tugged at Harlan's sleeve. "Holster the damn weapon." "Jesus Christ, we can't." "Shut up," Harlan hissed. "We finish this." The lieutenant's face was ashen, sweat dripping down his temples. His voice, meant to command, broke like brittle wood. "Officers, stand down." That's an order, but the order was swallowed by the chant, by the surge of people refusing to scatter. Inside the store, the clerk collapsed behind the counter, hands clutching his head, whispering, "Oh God, oh God." The customers who had pretended to shop now pressed against the glass, filming through streaked windows, their eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Maya raised her head at last. Her cheeks were streaked with tears, but her eyes blazed, fixed on Harlan. Her voice cracked once, then steadied, amplified not by volume, but by the raw conviction that carried it. "You think you wrote the end of his story tonight. But you didn't. You wrote the beginning of yours. And the whole world is reading it." The red hoodie teenager spun in a slow circle, livestream shaking in his hand. "Millions are watching, millions. Hashtags are blowing up. Hashtag justice for Elias. Hashtag comic not crime. Hashtag murder in uniform. This ain't going away." Across the street, car doors slammed as more people rushed over. A man in a business suit, tie loose from the heat, shouted, "I just saw it online. I had to come." "Oh my God, it's real." The gas station lot was swelling, the crowd tripling, voices overlapping into a storm of accusation. "Murderer! Hands off our kids! Say his name, Elias Carter." Maya lifted Elias's comic book from the ground, pages torn and blood-stained. She raised it high for the cameras. This is what he had in his hands. A storybook hero. And you turned it into a death sentence. The crowd roared, the chant fracturing into a dozen variations, all of them furious, all of them true. Harlan's pistol finally lowered, but the damage was done. The gun's echo still vibrated in every chest. His smirk was gone now, replaced by the twitch of a man realizing he had become a villain too big to contain. Reporters began to arrive, drawn like moths to the fire. Microphones thrust forward, cameras jostled against phones. The scene was no longer just a live stream, it was breaking news. Maya, blood-soaked and unyielding, became the center of every lens. She didn't move, didn't wipe her tears. Her voice, ragged but sharp, cut through the din. My son is dead because of their hate. Don't let them bury him twice with lies and reports. You are all witnesses now. Don't look away. The crowd answered with a roar so loud the neon sign above finally gave up, sputtering into darkness. In that darkness, only the glow of phones lit the scene. A mother, her fallen child, and a nation that could no longer pretend not to see. The night never ended. It spread out from the gas station like spilled oil, slicking the highway, the parish, the state, until it coated the whole country in a sheen of sleeplessness. The footage jumped from one shaking phone to another angles. Shouts, light, blood, and then it stabilized when a news van found the curb and a cameraman shouldered a lens that made the world look too clear. Within an hour, Elias's name floated up through the algorithms and took the city in its fist. By dawn it had the nation. Maya didn't sleep. There was nothing left in her to sleep with. Someone had placed a gray wool blanket over her shoulders in the back of an ambulance. It wasn't for warmth. It was the kind of blanket people imagine when they say the word mother, as if a rectangle of fabric could contain a tidal wave. A nurse from the parking lot sat beside her and held a paper cup of water she never lifted. In the opposite jump seat, a paramedic stared at his boots, as if there were answers written in the scuffs. When they reached the A bay, the automatic doors parted without urgency. Hospital light is honest. It reveals everything and apologizes for nothing. They tried to take the comic book from her, the one with the blood-bright cape on the cover. She didn't let go. The nurse said, "It's fine." She keeps it. No one argued. A resident with sleep-crushed hair came with forms, and the soft voice people reserve for bottomless holes. He said the word time. He said the word cause. He said the word sorry. The words clinked to the tile and didn't break because nothing else in the world had any gentleness left to give way. Maya signed where they told her to. Her hands moved with professional efficiency, the old muscle memory of court filings and petitions. Each signature came out like a blade. At 3:11 a.m., when the first satellite trucks formed a perimeter around the hospital like metallic sunflowers, a reporter with a perfect blowout told a perfect camera that a boy had been shot by police at a gas station and that emotions are running high. She used the phrase community unrest, as if grief were a weather pattern. Behind her, people pressed up against a police cordon and didn't speak. Some held candles. Others held phones aloft like votives, screens glowing with the looped moment that had severed the night from the day. The loop acquired captions. The captions acquired music. Someone ran it in reverse and forward, until the gunshot became a metronome. Someone froze the frame where the comic slipped from Elias's fingers and added the words. This was his weapon. Someone else clipped the audio. Just the 8 words that had crawled out of Harlan's mouth, worlds cleaner, with one less problem, and let those 8 words become a fuse. By 5:02 a.m., the hashtag had matured into a banner. Hashtag Justice for Elias was no longer a plea. It had hardened into a demand. It climbed the trending columns in a dozen languages and parked there like a new constellation. People who had never believed in anything but themselves changed their profile photos to a grainy still of a boy mid-breath. People who had believed in everything but results wrote long threads, and then, for once, kept them short. At 6:40, the parish sheriff held a press conference outside a beige building that looked exactly like every beige building authority has ever chosen to speak from. He used the phrase officer-involved shooting, and the phrase administrative leave, and the phrase ongoing investigation. Every phrase was a straw placed carefully on a camel's spine. A hand shot up in the scrum. "Sheriff, are you aware that the body cam footage appears to contradict the initial narrative?" The sheriff blinked. He didn't know yet about the email. He didn't know about the leak. The email surfaced at 7:13 a.m. on the website of a small, local reporter known for dog-with-a-bone stories and coffee breath. It was a screenshot at first, header and footer. 10 minutes later, the reporter posted the raw.eml with metadata intact, as if anticipating the inevitable, fake, doctored hoax. It wasn't. The timestamp landed 11 minutes after the gunshot. The subject line read, "Need to nail resistance." The text was worse. "Girl, boy, whatever, call it resistance. Mother assaulted officer. Keep it clean." It was signed from a captain 2 floors up from the lieutenant who had told his men to holster their guns and had discovered he was the only person in the chain who remembered how cable anchors smelled blood in the water and called it breaking news. They brought on retired chiefs to say the words proper procedure, and then brought on defense attorneys to say the words prosecutorial misconduct, and someone remembered the mother was a liar and pulled a headshot of Maya from the law school's directory, a photo where she was smiling and wearing a blue blazer and had no blood on her anywhere. By 8, the morning shows had booked panels. A senator from a neighboring state put on his flag pin and said change starts with conversation, which is what people say when they can't remember where their spine is. A congresswoman with braids down her back refused to nod and said, "We've been conversing for 400 years. In the lower third, producers argued over whether to use the word murdered. 2 of them insisted on allegedly. The third wrote murdered and went to refill her coffee. Maya sat in a plastic chair outside a door with a number. The nurse remained, a quiet witness. Sometime after dawn, the gray wool blanket slid from Maya's shoulders to the floor, puddling like fog. She didn't notice. Her phone was face down in her lap, buzzing with a life she hadn't asked for. Messages, students, former clients, colleagues who were already friends and colleagues who never had been. A stranger's number sent a single text, "I am so sorry. I will stand wherever you tell me to stand." Another stranger sent, "I saw it. I will testify." Another, "They did this to my brother in '09. I kept the audio. It's yours if it helps." The phone buzzed until it seemed like it might hum its way through her bones. At 9:22, a man in a suit, the color of a storm, arrived with a briefcase and the kind of face that knows law like a second language. He introduced himself as counsel with a public interest firm and asked permission to sit. Maya nodded. He said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, he didn't talk about lawsuits. He asked about Elias's favorite breakfast. She told him, cinnamon toast and sliced bananas and too much syrup when she wasn't watching. The man in the storm suit nodded like that was the first true fact he'd been given all morning. The protests began around noon, as if the country had set its clocks by grief. In the city where it happened, people poured into the streets with hand-painted signs, and the kind of energy that looks like chaos until you notice how organized rage can be when it's tired of asking. A paper banner taped to a broom handle read, "He was 13. Another, "I'm holding a phone so he won't have to hold a gun." In a downtown 3 states away, a daycare hung a sheet from its second-story windows. "Our kids are watching." In a cul-de-sac in a suburb that only ever makes the news for real estate values, a cluster of parents stood in the rain and said the boy's name out loud to each other because the syllables needed a place to echo. At 1:05 p.m., an old clip resurfaced of Maya debating a panel of men on a cable show about qualified immunity. In the clip, she said, Impunity dressed as doctrine is still impunity, and the host smiled and moved to commercial. This time, the clip didn't go to break. It went everywhere. By mid-afternoon, a muralist with paint under every fingernail arrived at the gas station and asked the owner, very politely, for a wall. The owner, who had slept none and cried some, nodded. By sunset, the wall wore a face that half the country now recognized and the other half pretended to. The muralist painted the comic book into the boy's hands, but he painted the cape around his shoulders. He wrote, in block letters beneath, "He saved yous by making yous look." The police department went quiet, which in itself was a noise. Their press liaison canceled the briefing, out of an abundance of caution, a phrase that can mean anything and therefore means nothing at all. Meanwhile, inside the building, someone pulled old files from a drawer and found 5 complaints with the same 2 names and the same 3 stamps: closed, unsubstantiated, resolved. An officer 2 years out of the academy photocopied them while his hands shook and then wondered where to send them. He sent them to everyone. The audio came just after 5. It wasn't body cam. It wasn't the live stream. It was someone's radio on scan mode, the frequency and time code unmistakable. The clip was short enough to learn by heart and filthy enough to live there. Take the little one down fast, don't waste time. A woman who had never cursed in public before in her life put it on her Facebook with the caption, "Enough." By the time anyone thought to question authenticity, 3 independent audio engineers had verified the compression signature and 2 ham radio hobbyists had mapped the signal against a scanner log. A bishop in Houston played it from a pulpit. A DJ in Atlanta looped it under a drumline. The country's heart rate went up. Corporate accounts, which always arrive late and overdressed, discovered a moral vocabulary right on schedule. A sneaker company promised investment in youth programs. A delivery app tweeted a black square and deleted it and tweeted a paragraph and pinned it. A bank announced a task force. Someone asked the bank where it kept the task force when children weren't bleeding on asphalt. The bank did not reply. Politicians portioned themselves between the safe and the true. A governor tamped his hands downward in a press conference and said the words patience and process and urged the citizens to remain calm. And a woman with a bullhorn on the courthouse steps said, "We are calm enough to build something with our bare hands if we have to." A city council member called for the chief's resignation. A mayor said words that sounded like change and might become it if anyone stayed long enough to push. At the hospital, a chaplain came, then a pastor, then a rabbi, then a woman with braids who said she wasn't anything official, but knew how to organize meals and rides. Someone brought coffee. Someone else brought a stuffed animal with a cape because it felt like the right thing, and maybe it was. The storm-suited lawyer took the coffee and then forgot to drink it. The nurse finally slept sitting up, her head tilted at a painful angle that still didn't look as painful as anything else in the room. Maya stood once the whole afternoon, only once, and walked to a sink. She turned on the faucet and watched water run over hands that would not come clean. When she shut it off, the sound of the water kept going inside her head. She pressed her palms to the counter and let her weight rest there, and then lifted it again because weight is a teacher, and she needed new lessons now. Her phone rang. The caller ID was a number from a newsroom she recognized because she'd been quoted there before, when the law was still the law and not an obituary. She answered, and a producer's voice, bright with urgency, asked if she would be willing to speak live at the top of the hour. "I will," Maya said, and surprised herself with how steady she sounded. "I will say his name. And I will say what you won't." They set up a remote camera in a small consultation room. The wall behind her had a watercolor painting of a sailboat fleeing a storm. A makeup artist offered powder. Maya shook her head. The producer counted down in her ear from 5. The anchor said her name and told the country it was time to hear from a mother. Maya looked into the lens and saw nothing and everything. She said the words she had practiced all day without knowing she was practicing. My son's name is Elias Carter. He was 13. He liked cinnamon toast and comics and the part of movies where the hero doesn't fight, he solves. He was not a suspect. He was not a threat. He was my child. And he was executed by a man who called it cleaning the world. The anchor said, "Professor Carter," and she said, "Don't call me professor right now." And the anchor shut her mouth like a learned thing. Maya went on. "You will be told to be patient. I will be told to be polite. We have tried patience. We have tried politeness. We gave the system our sons and our daughters and our nights and our mornings, and our holidays and our names and our prayers and our tax dollars and our votes and our silence. And what we got in return was a hole in a boy that no language can fill." She paused and let the silence do what it was meant to do. So here is what happens next. We do not let them write it. Not this time. We write it. We stand in front of the cameras and behind them and beside them, and we say his name until it is an address the law has to deliver to. The producer told her afterward that the segment had broken their server. The clip jumped to every platform and then jumped the platforms, and became a thing people texted to each other in lines at grocery stores and during shifts at plants and between the second and third graders on the playground who knew enough to know the world had changed and needed a grown-up to tell it so. By evening, a map on the news showed cities with red dots where crowds had filled streets. Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Houston, Jackson, Atlanta, Memphis. Then it colonized the coasts, Brooklyn's courthouse steps, Oakland's Lake Merritt, a bridge in Portland you could hear before you could see. College kids painted bedsheets and stopped traffic. Grandmothers sat in folding chairs and handed out bottled water like communion. A pastor in Selma unrolled a banner his church had kept since '65 because they knew. They always knew. Later, as the sky turned the purple of old bruises, a line of officers in riot gear formed at the edge of the largest crowd outside City Hall. Their faces were obscured. Their batons were not. A young officer near the end of the line stared at the ground like he'd lost something there he couldn't name. A woman with gray in her hair and a voice that could split oak stepped in front of him and, without touching him, said softly, "You got anybody who calls you daddy?" He swallowed. He blinked. He nodded once, tiny and terrible. She said, "Then look up. Look at us. We're not going anywhere." Someone in the crowd started a call and response, and the whole square answered. "Say his name, Elias. Say his name, Elias." The syllables rolled down the street and struck the courthouse doors. Inside, a janitor paused with his mop and took off his hat because he'd never heard the building sound like a throat before. There were rumors that Harlan had been moved to a safe house, that Simmons had asked for a lawyer, that the lieutenant who'd ordered the holstering had been sent home pending review, which sounded like punishment because it always lands on the wrong heads first. There were more emails. There were texts. A state rep said he'd seen the file and would go on record. A prosecutor's aide claimed they'd been told to wait until outrage cooled, as if outrage were an electrical storm instead of a precise instrument dot at the hospital. The storm-suited lawyer laid a yellow legal pad on his knees and wrote names: the trucker, the nurse, the girl in the bonnet, the red-hoodied teen, the business suit man who'd crossed lanes to be there. He wrote badge and left a blank because he didn't want to write it wrong. He wrote the captain's name from the email and underlined it until the paper fuzzed. Maya, for the first time all day, closed her eyes. Not sleep, just a choosing not to see for a handful of breaths. Behind the lids, she saw her boy's first bicycle day, the wobbly knees and the shock of balance. She saw the science fair volcano that had stained the apartment carpet. She saw the time he'd crawled into her bed because he watched a movie about an alien and realized the thing that frightened him wasn't the creature. It was the officer who didn't believe the kid who'd seen it. "I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of the police," he'd said then. and it had landed between them like a prognosis. She opened her eyes and sat up straighter. The nurse returned from somewhere with a stack of printouts. "They're planning a vigil," she said. "Tonight. At the station. What time?" Maya asked. 9. "Then we go," Maya said. "You don't have to." "I do." When they arrived, the station steps were a low altar under a sky veined with searchlights and drones. Candles on cardboard plates bobbed like stars in a human constellation. Strangers parted as Maya walked up the center, not because anyone had announced she would speak, but because the space built itself the way tide carves a channel for the water it knows is coming. The muralist from the gas station stood off to the side, paint on his knuckles. The girl in the bonnet held a megaphone and trembled until her hand found the red hoodie. Kid's hand, and then she didn't tremble anymore. Maya didn't take the megaphone. She didn't need it. The night had become an amplifier. "My son's name," she said, and they said it back to her so softly the sound rose like breath on a mirror. She told them about the cinnamon toast and the library card and the way he always checked the backseat before they pulled out because he'd once seen a video about a kid who saved his whole family that way. She held up the comic book. She said, "He believed heroes were people who saw what was about to happen and warned others in time." She said, "He tried. He warned us. And now it's our turn." From the edge of the crowd, a voice called, "What do we do?" It wasn't rhetorical. It was a plea and a blueprint request. "First," Maya said, "we remember that grief is a muscle. It can lift. It can carry. We carry each other." She pointed toward the courthouse down the block. "Then we make them carry us. Tomorrow morning we file. We subpoena. We build a case they can't wriggle out of with vocabulary. We find every person who saw, who heard, who wrote, who ordered. We make a stack of truth so high it throws shade on every lie. And tonight?" Someone asked. "Tonight," she said, and the word tasted like metal and mercy. "We keep the lights on. We don't blink. We tell his story until the story learns its own name. We hold this ground." The crowd answered in 100 tones that somehow made one sound. A woman began to sing, a low hymn repurposed, the lyrics rewritten in the language of now. Voices joined. The melody didn't rise. It deepened, as if it were going down through the asphalt to tap something old and immovable under the city's bones. A line of officers stood in the shadow near the door. The young one who'd nodded earlier stared straight ahead and then, very carefully, closed his eyes. He didn't move. He didn't break the line. But when the hymn swelled, his lips moved. No one could hear the words, but you didn't need to. To know what a prayer looks like when it finally remembers how. On a rooftop across the street, a drone operator framed the crowd so the map of candles looked like a river. In a penthouse 2 time zones away, a CEO watched it and told someone to draft a statement that didn't sound like a statement. In a house with peeling paint and a broken porch light, a grandmother turned off her TV and stood in the dark kitchen with her hands on the edge of the sink and said the boy's name to the tile, and to the clock and to the ghosts. Of all the names that came before just before midnight, the storm-suited lawyer tapped Maya's elbow. "The Department of Justice called," he said. "They're sending a team in the morning." "Good," she said. The word didn't hold relief. It held recognition, a chess player noticing that at last the other side was moving a piece more complicated than a pawn. "And the DA wants to meet," he added. "They can meet me at the mural," she said. "They can meet me in daylight," he nodded. Daylight then. Around them, the vigil didn't end so much as evolve. Some people sat. Some stood. Some prayed. Some argued quietly about tactics with the intense politeness of people who know they'll still be shoulder to shoulder tomorrow. Someone erected a folding table and placed stacks of blank poster board and fat markers. A little boy with big ears wrote in shaky block letters, "Don't shoot my heroes." Maya looked up at the courthouse clock. It was almost tomorrow. She thought of the 500-page casebook she had taught from and how none of their margins could hold what the night had written. She thought of her son's small hand in hers on sidewalks where she'd said look both ways, and how she would now have to teach a country to do the same. The nurse touched her shoulder. "You need to rest," she said. "I can't," Maya said. "Then breathe," the nurse said. "Do the thing you taught him to do." Maya inhaled. She exhaled. She did it again. Around her, 1,000 people did it too, and for a second the square sensed, one chest, one lung. A camera caught the moment and sent it outward. In apartments and dorm rooms and living rooms and hospital waiting rooms, people breathed with them. In squad rooms, some did too and felt foolish and didn't stop. The clip found the senator with the flag pin and made him, just for a beat, forget his lines. It found the congresswoman with the braids and made her smile, a small involuntary thing like the memory of a song. It found the lieutenant who had said holster your damn guns and made him sit on the edge of his bathtub with his hands in his hair until the water ran cold. It found Harlan. Wherever they had taken him, whatever door they had locked behind him, he watched himself on loop and tried to find a frame where he was not the worst thing in it. He did not find one. The 8 words he had thrown into the night came back at him like a boomerang with teeth. Just before dawn, when the candles were little lakes and the air smelled like wax and rain, a woman in a green coat stepped up to Maya and put something small and cold in her hand. "From my brother," she said. "He asked me to give this to you." It was an SD card in a plastic case. "He's a dispatcher," she whispered. "He's tired." Maya closed her fingers around the rectangle that might be a key or a weapon or both. "Thank you," she said, and knew she was saying it to more than one person, more than one thing. The horizon bruised pink. Sirens sounded somewhere distant and didn't come closer. The courthouse clock struck 6 with a tired dignity. The vigil became a morning shift. Someone brewed coffee that tasted like resolve. The mural at the gas station caught the first light and glowed. Across town, the beige building unlocked itself. The captain who had typed the email arrived to find the lobby full of cameras and a single mother with a storm-suited lawyer sitting on a bench, their backs straight, the comic book on her knees like scripture. She looked up as the doors parted. She didn't smile. She didn't stand. "Good morning," she said, and the words had edges. "Let's begin." The courthouse smelled like lemon polish and old arguments. Reporters massed in the rotunda, badges swinging, cables snaking across marble like vines. People had slept on the steps to keep their place in line, wrapped in blankets and banners. They called it the trial of a single officer, but everybody knew it was the cross-examination of a country. Maya arrived with the storm-suited lawyer and the nurse from the gas station who refused to stop showing up. The red hoodie kid wore a button-down today, still holding his phone like a talisman. The girl in the satin bonnet had pressed her hair and borrowed a blazer. The trucker scrubbed his hands as if grease could argue against the truth living in his throat. Inside Department G, 12 jurors studied everyone who walked in like they were already memorizing history. The judge was silver-haired, his bench stacked with folders and a chipped mug that said "Do the work." When he read the indictment, murder in the first degree for Officer Harlan McKay, conspiracy, falsification, and obstruction for Officer Mark Simmons, the room absorbed the names like a sentence of its own. Opening statements are theater, but this one dropped the curtain fast. The prosecutor didn't thunder. He unspooled. He laid the pieces on the floor as if inviting the jury to step around them and discover there was nowhere else to stand. The live streams, the leaked email, the audio clip, the convenience store's mysteriously blinking camera, the radio traffic on scan, the paint still drying on a mural that had taught a city to look. He said Elias's name as if it were the spine of a book and every page depended on it. The defense tried to draw a smaller circle. "Tragic," counsel said. with a tone that made the words sound like an alibi. A rapidly evolving situation. He invoked fear. He invoked training. He invoked everything that had always been invoked. Then he gestured at Harlan, whose jaw flexed like a fist. My client acted within his understanding of a threat. The judge went to work. The jury leaned in. Outside, 1,000 people watched on a screen they had hauled into the square. Candles stashed in backpacks for nightfall. Witnesses first. The trucker, sunburned forearms clean and folded, told them he'd watched the boy stand by the SUV, that he'd watched the camera blink out, that he'd watched the officers escalate as if climbing a ladder they'd built ahead of time. The nurse said what nurses always say in rooms like this. Here's the body, here's what it did, here's what it stopped doing, here is what none of my training could reverse. The clerk stood small in a big suit and admitted to turning off the camera when a voice on the phone told him to. When the prosecutor asked whose voice, the clerk swallowed and said the captain's name. In the gallery, pens scratched like hail. They played the live stream. No voiceover, no commentary. Just the lot, the fluorescent hum, the counting from 1 to 5, the comic book like a bright mistake, the officer's thumb snap on the holster strap, and then the shot. The gallery made a sound people make when they watch a thing they already know happen again. The jurors did not look away. Jurors never do. That's their curse and their calling. They played the audio dispatch clip the woman in the green coat had pressed into Maya's hand before dawn. The words filled the courtroom the way smoke fills a house. Take the little one down fast. Don't waste time. The defense objected. Chain of custody. Authenticity. The prosecutor produced affidavits from 3 engineers and a ham radio guy with a spiral notebook. The judge allowed it. The jurors' faces tightened in the exact same place, like a muscle everyone in the room shared. Then the email. Projected 10 feet tall. The pixels still mean. Need to nail resistance. Girl, boy, whatever, call it resistance. Mother assaulted officer. Keep it clean. The captain who'd written it sat under oath and said he'd been seeking clarity. The prosecutor asked what clarity looks like when it instructs people to lie. The captain looked down and found none. Simmons took the stand in his own defense. He wore a different uniform now. A suit that didn't fit and a story that fit too well. He spoke about fear, about adrenaline, about a hand on a chest that he decided was assault. He said he hadn't seen the comic. He'd seen something else, something dark, something that looked like something. The prosecutor let him talk himself onto a narrow ledge, and then held up the frame of Elias's small hand, lifting the comic to show the crowd. Is this the something? The prosecutor asked. Simmons's mouth opened and closed. The word no arrived too late to be useful. Harlan did not testify. When a man believes he's the weather, he doesn't explain rain. He sat with his chin tilted as if there were a mirror only he could see. When the prosecutor played the 8 words, worlds cleaner with one less problem, he shifted once in his chair, and then he didn't move at all. A statue commissioned for the wrong square dot. It was Maya's turn. She swore to tell the truth, and then upgraded the promise. Her shoes made no sound on the carpet. She did not carry notes. She carried a comic book that had become an exhibit and a relic. The prosecutor asked for history, and she gave it. The cinnamon toast. The library card. The boy who checked the backseat for monsters and sometimes found them in uniforms at the edge of his imagination. She didn't say, I warned you, she said. He did. And she opened the comic and read a line he loved about heroes seeing what's about to happen and getting in the way. The defense tried. Professor Carter, the lawyer began. Not today, she said softly. Miss Carter, he corrected. You placed your hand on an officer's chest. You interfered. I placed my hand between a man and my son, she said. You call that interference? I call it motherhood. Isn't it true that you... What's true? She said, not waiting to be asked. Is that my son was a child and that I taught the law for 20 years, and that in 20 seconds these men taught me what the law becomes in the wrong hands. The judge did not admonish her for speaking past the question. Sometimes a courtroom knows when the transcript needs the full paragraph. Prosecutor approached for one more question and didn't ask it. He said, "If you were here, what would you want us to do?" Maya looked at the jurors like she was seeing them for the first time and like she had known them all her life. He would want you to look. He believed that was the real superpower. She held up the comic. He would want you to look and to write the right ending. Deliberations take as long as they take. Sometimes they're a calendar. Sometimes they're a clock. This one was a clock with a busted second hand. The jurors went out with stacks of exhibits and returned before anyone had finished their bad courthouse coffee. The foreperson stood. She had a teacher's posture and a mother's eyes. The judge asked the question for the ages. "Have you reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor. Count 1, murder in the first degree. Guilty. Count 2, conspiracy to falsify reports. Guilty. Count 3, obstruction and evidence tampering. Guilty, against Simmons. Accessory before and after the fact. Guilty, falsification of public records. Guilty." There are gasps in rooms like that. Always. There are sobs and a sound like relief cracking. Harlan stared at a point between worlds. Simmons's shoulders fell in on themselves until his suit had no tenant. The judge rapped his gavel once and then set it down like a man setting down a tool he had finally used for the thing it was meant for. In some places they schedule sentencing for later. Here, the calendar had already been consulted by a million screens. The judge looked at the statute, and then he looked at the boy's mother, and then he looked at the men who had made all this necessary. "Mr. McKay," he said, "because titles are not owed forever. For the crime of murder in the first degree, with special circumstances including abuse of public trust and bias motivation established through your own recorded words, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." Silence. And then the sound that isn't sound, air returning to lungs and coming back out in one breath. "Mr. Simmons," the judge continued, "for your role in conspiring to falsify reports, in obstructing justice, in enabling violence with paperwork and lies, this court sentences you to 20 years in the custody of the Department of Corrections, and a lifetime prohibition from serving in any capacity of public trust." He lifted his eyes to the room. "Let this be a record, not just of what happened here, but of what we were willing to do about it." The bailiffs moved, as gently as men with heavy belts can move. Harlan's hands found cuffs and discovered how small hands can make a man feel. He turned once toward the gallery, as if searching for a witness he could still convince. The muralist stared at him the way artists stare at blank walls, seeing exactly what belongs there. The girl in the pressed blazer did not lower her phone. Outside, the square erupted. The feed lagged and then caught up and then rushed forward. The chant came back not as a plea but as a benediction. People held each other. People stood alone and still felt held. The mural at the gas station took the news on its paint and seemed, for a second, to exhale. Reporters found Maya on the steps. Microphones flowered. Questions swarmed. She did not give them triumph. She gave them scale. "This is not the end," she said. "This is the floor. We build from here. We do not mistake a sentence for a system. We do not mistake accountability for cure." A young reporter asked if she felt closure. It was the kind of question young reporters ask because they've been told stories need doors. "No," Maya said. "I feel a door opening, and I feel a wind coming through it. I intend to stand up." The storm-suited lawyer, his tie loosened, his hair a little more human, leaned in. "The DOJ team wants to meet about the broader pattern," he said. "Tomorrow," she told him. "Tonight belongs to my son." They walked to the square where the screen was still bright and noisy, and the candles were ready again even though the sun was still up. The nurse squeezed Maya's hand and pointed. On the courthouse lawn, kids were sprawled with poster board and markers, drawing capes on stick figures and writing words that were too big for their hands and exactly the right size for the day. A boy with ears a little too big and bravery exactly the right size looked up. "Is it true?" he asked. "He got justice?" Maya knelt so her eyes were level with his. "He got a part of it," she said. "We will get the rest." "How?" he asked. "By remembering," she said. "By showing up. By making it impossible to forget. By deciding this is not a moment, but a method." He nodded the solemn nod of a child rehearsing being a citizen. Then he lifted a marker and with careful strokes, wrote Elias across a cape. Night came without menace for the first time in a while. The vigil became a celebration that refused to lie to itself. People sang the hymn they had invented and didn't mind forgetting some verses. A brass band found its way to the front steps and turned grief into sound that could be carried home. The girl in the blazer laughed for the first time since the gas station, and then cried again, and then laughed through that, which is how people heal when they know better than to pretend anything is whole. Later, when the square thinned and the cables coiled back into trucks, Maya returned to the mural. The wall was warm from the day. She put her palm on the painted cape and felt nothing mystical, and still felt something. She took the comic from her bag, the edges still stiff where blood had dried and the cover still bright where it hadn't, and slid it into a clear sleeve the muralist had taped to the brick. People would leave flowers. They would leave notes. They would leave the kind of offerings humans have always made to each other when the words aren't enough. But the comic stayed. "Look both ways," she whispered, "because old habits become blessings when you repeat them enough." A wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain and hot concrete and food trucks and possibility. Somewhere a judge turned off his office light and ran a hand over his face and thought about the line between punishment and change. Somewhere a young officer folded his riot gear and made an appointment with himself to decide who he was going to be. Somewhere the captain who had written the email stared at a blank resignation letter and tried to find a phrase that amounted to truth. And in the square, the candles winked like a new alphabet. People breathed together. Not in unison, never that, but in a way that rhymed. When the hour got late enough to be early again, the storm-suited lawyer walked Maya back toward the courthouse steps, now littered with wax pools and poster board. He asked, "Do you want a ride?" She shook her head. "I'll walk." "Where?" he asked, as if there were only a few options left in the world. "Home," she said, and the word contained the court and the square and the law school and a mural on a cinder block wall and every place a boy had loved, because she had decided to make the country small enough to carry and big enough to deserve him on the way. The nurse caught up, falling into step. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The city sounded different, a little less armored, a little more awake. At a crosswalk, the signal flicked to walk, and for once the timing felt right. They stepped off the curb. The light changed behind them. It would change again. That was fine. They had learned to look. They had learned to keep walking. They had learned that the justice you can name is the kind you can hold, and the kind you can hold is the kind you can pass from one hand to the next until 1,000 hands are steady. Somewhere, a camera was still recording. Somewhere a child was still drawing. Somewhere a door was still open. The night did not end. It became morning. When the judge's gavel fell, it was more than a verdict. It was proof that silence can be broken, that even in the darkest nights, justice can still rise. Maya walked out of that courthouse with her son's comic book pressed to her heart, not as a relic of loss, but as a torch for the future. And across the nation, people carried his name like a promise. Elias would never be forgotten. If this story moved you, join us by subscribing. Because every voice matters, every story matters, and together, we can keep the light burning.